Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Jeremy Norton, who's here to share with us his new book, Trauma Sponges: Dispatches from the Scarred Heart of Emergency Response. So do you have any idea what it's like to be a first responder today? Well, Jeremy's here to share with us just that. Jeremy Norton has been a firefighter EMT with the Minneapolis Fire Department since 2000. He was promoted to captain in 2007 and heads Station 17 in South Minneapolis. Born and raised in Washington, D.C., he received a bachelor's degree from Tufts University and a master's degree in creative writing from Boston University. After teaching high school in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Norton moved to Minneapolis, where he taught creative writing at the Loft Literary Center before joining the Minneapolis Fire Department. So let's welcome to the show, Jeremy Norton.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. I got to tell you, as soon as I saw this book and went through it and was reading it, I knew we needed to talk. There's so much here that I didn't even really understand. And I'd love for you to share with our listeners just what inspired you to write this book.
Um, it's funny. I should have anticipated that this was going to be the first question from a great many interviewers. And I think because I've been working on some form of the writing since I started in 2000, and actually since before I started, when I was writing about the kind of twisting and turning labyrinthine hiring process. So the book it has been in process in one form or another for over 20 years. So I've been kind of constantly doing. So there's not. So when people say, "Well, how did you start it? Was it during the pandemic?" And I was like, "Actually, I've just been pushing this rock up a hill since I think Bill Clinton was still president at the time." So, but I started writing because as I was a new firefighter EMT, I was struck by the disparity or the disconnect between what I thought the job was, what we were told the job was going to be, and what we actually did. And simultaneously, I kept going on calls where citizens who had called 911 were surprised or agitated or bothered that there's a fire truck outside their house. So we got a lot of, why is there a fire truck? I didn't call, there's nothing's on fire. I want to ride to the hospital. Okay. And in trying to make sense of that, I started to really understand or started to wrestle with all the massiveness of our healthcare system, and we see it at the street level at the very bottom. What a man named Roger Hooter, who's a retired firefighter medic in Florida, called gutter medicine. That we see people at the bottom, we see people struggling, we see people, not just with regular emergencies, but for whom 911 emergency is their primary care. And so understanding that most people don't have a conception of what the emergency medical system is, nor what the realities of the American healthcare system are. And then try to explain to my relatives why I was never at Thanksgiving dinner or what we did. That was kind of the beginning impetus to try to make sense of it and then to try to explain it to others. And then the more time I spent doing it, the more I started, really looking at the sociology of emergency response, which is really a cultural sociology, the way that race and class and gender shape, who needs help, who gets help, and who does the helping. And so that's really what I've wrestled with for, since 1999.
So can you share with us what your day as a firefighter really entails? I think I was so surprised when just reading your book, just going through some of the misconceptions.
Sure, sure. Well, for most cities in America, and I of course can't speak to much more than what I've read, the the fire department provides either paramedic level or EMT level emergency medical care because the fire stations are located strategically around the city. There are generally more firefighters on duty than there are ambulances. So we work either with an ambulance service built into the fire department or in concert in coordination with a local ambulance service. So, and that's been since the 1980s. That it, what this not we what the cities realized was that the firefighters are already there. We're already somewhat trained. Why don't we provide more training? And that way we are able to respond to not just kind of car wrecks, building collapses and fires, but a whole range of emergency 911 calls. But what has also happened since the 80s is between fire prevention programs, public education programs, smoke detectors, really, the number of calls, the number of working fires in America has gone down every year. Now, when a fire happens, and of course they still happen, they remain deadly, labor intensive, time critical, and potentially devastating events. So you can't not have a city fire department fully staffed in your city because the volunteer model doesn't work in terms of having people respond from wherever they are to get to their gear to get to the station because fire expands so quickly exponentially basically that by the in the time it takes to muster the house or the room will become the house fire, the house might become the next house or the entire block. So firefighting remains our primary objective, our primary purpose, which is to save lives, and protect property. But within that, as the actual working fires have gone down every year since I believe 1970s, I believe, if not 1980s. The calls for medical service, so the 911 medical calls, have gone up every year. And since I started in 2000, I want to say that the Minneapolis Fire Department's calls for service, so 911 calls that require the fire department or that involve the fire department, are probably up 40, if not 50%, right? And what that reflects is all the ways in which our social welfare system, public health system, or our society is struggling. So in our city, anything basically that doesn't require a police response will get an EMS response or a fire response because the 911 system really has four options. They have the police department, they have the fire department, they have the ambulance service, and then they have public works. So for anything, whether it's a sprained ankle, someone who's down on the sidewalk, someone who thinks they see smoke, a car wreck, every possible thing that someone might call 911 about, dispatch has uh, a very small Rolodex for those of us old enough to remember Rolodexes, and that becomes we're just emergency responders, and then connected to that we have as a culture, I think, and also with cell phones, people dial things in without thinking. And so a lot of 911 calls are generated that don't remotely rise up to the level that the system was intended to address, right? Like, so most of us, we think of a 911 call. It's, I fell and broke my leg. I'm in the bottom of the stairs at my house. I need help. Or you're having crushing chest pain and you can't breathe and you need help, right? And that's what we do. But we also go to people who haven't been able to afford or get access to their medications. And so their ongoing health issues are acting up and they call 911 essentially to have the very highly trained paramedics serve as an Uber to get to the emergency room. And the emergency room is intended to fix your heart blockage, fix my shattered leg, check to make sure we're not dying, and then pass us to our regular physician. So a great number, I would say you'd have to ask of an ER doc, or actually probably an ER nurse, a great number of their calls in every day are not actually life or death, which is what it's intended for. It's because people aren't going to their primary care clinics. And so in any day, I show up at work and I have no idea what's going to happen in our small patch of earth. It can be 5 nosebleeds, it can be 5 heart attacks, it can be none of those. We can have a day with a couple fires, we can have weeks with no fires. It's a wonderful job in that I show up and I know the area, I know the equipment, I know my coworkers, and I have a rough idea of what we might see, but I never ever know. And we might run 50 difficulty breathing calls in a week, and you will see a range of 10 people who have done drugs and side effects of the drugs are they're having difficulty breathing, 10 people who have chronic obstructive lung disease because of smoking, 10 people with chest pains from heart attacks, and then a handful of people whose symptoms are just mind boggling, right? You never know. You step off the rig and you have no idea what you're walking into.
That's just a combination of everything. It seems like you pretty much get the calls that don't fit into anything else.
Right, or we get the calls because we respond with the paramedics. So, anything that's vaguely medical, we respond because the medics in Minneapolis and a lot of cities, the paramedics, excuse me, are highly trained. They're allowed to, set up IVs and push medications, and they have a way to transport people to the hospital. We have less training, but we can keep somebody who's critical alive until they get there, and then we work to support the paramedics. Same way with a lot of calls that are gray areas where the police and fire and or paramedics will all respond together. So there's an umbrella of emergency services, and often when you hear on the local news or read in the paper, car crash, responders pulled somebody out, they performed life-saving measures, the person made it or didn't. That kind of umbrella term of responders or EMS might mean firefighters, it might mean police, it might mean paramedics. It's just kind of the media shorthand, right? So we have no we, we have a lot of interagency communication without a lot of formal interagency training.
Okay. I appreciate you taking the time to explain that because I have, when I was reading your book, I had no idea that you did just the vast amount of different jobs that you do.
Sure. And right, and that became one of the, I think, like, one of the challenges, and I think frankly, one of the parts of the book that I wish, we always, once it's out, you wish you could make some small changes or big changes. um, that what I was trying to do prior to 2020 was I had it broken up into kind of distinct examples, so I basically wanted to provide a panorama to a reader of what emergency response entails. So basically, going back to your fundamental question, which is lots of people's fundamental question, and then I'm also trying to do service to, all the very wonderful men and women who are in emergency services, the police officers, the paramedics, the firefighters, to really honor and reflect to people who don't know what it is we do and what it is the work entails. So I had like as I said, a panorama. So I had respiratory distress, I had cardiac issues, I had OBGYN issues, I had end of life issues, I had car wrecks, shootings, stabbings. I had, everything was kind of siloed with like both vignettes and kind of some reflections on what that meant. And then as the pandemic hit, and then with kind of the effects of May and June of 2020, it both crystallized and demanded more focus there, and so I had to cut a lot of stuff out. And one of the things I'm trying to do in the book, and I don't know, and time will tell if I've done it effectively or not, is really to give the readers who want, people who want a clear answer. As I say, like we don't get tidy resolutions. We see people, and we have no idea what happens afterwards, and we show up, and we keep showing up, And so it's an interesting existential job. And I tried to kind of shape the book so that there was that kind of cyclical nature that you you might think you've had enough hearing me talk about respiratory distress, but it after 23 years, I'm still going to variations on a theme. All of us, all my coworkers are seeing iterations of people who need help breathing, people who have chest pain, people who are having stroke symptoms, people who have drug and alcohol issues, right? And so that's part of it is that cumulative effect becomes the challenge. And so that's kind of what what I tried to shift it a little bit. And so I cut out a lot of the kind of very specific aspects of so I almost have a whole second book of OBGYN, old age, car wrecks, stabbings, shootings. I mean, it's a list of mayhem because that's the reality of the job. Uh, but I also realized then that it's also firsthand to me and second nature that for someone, a lot of the readers who have no idea, I don't like I have a hard time figuring out how much I need to explicate the readers. No, really, we never know what we're going to do. There isn't any better system. This is our reality. And you have to be able to kind of keep your head above water as you're floating through society's traumas.
So is that the reason for the title Trauma Sponges?
It is, again, like this is my first full published book. I had a couple that in fiction 20 odd years ago, but they didn't go anywhere. So I am gunning not for Granta's 40 under 40, but AARP's Rookie of the Year, given my slightly advanced age for being a first time author. But a trauma sponge, to date myself, is what in the operating theaters in, kind of in the olden days, they literally had literal sponges that absorbed the blood, where now we have vacuum, now they have vacuum and suction and much more advanced stuff. They literally had a sponge to sop up the blood. Um, and and again in the book, I'm trying to walk the line between not allowing a reader to ignore the things that really are the essence or the key realities of this work. But I also don't, I don't want to like give people nightmares, and I don't want to upset the squeamish, right? And so like this is a job where you are just like wading through other people's bodies and bodily functions and the contents of inside our skin suits. And then there's the deeper and harder part is the emotional and psychological aspect, and that way that we do absorb the traumas of others. And so, yeah, I mean, it's both the kind of a literal metaphor of the absorption of blood and fluids, and then it's also much more the psychic or emotional absorbance. Yeah, so it's both.
Well, I do want to talk about secondary trauma, but before we go there, I'd love for you to share with us your first experience when you had your knee cut open that kind of led you to the job that you're in.
Well, okay, it didn't quite. It wasn't that was kind of that motivated me as much as I moved to Minneapolis in '94, and a mutual friend, said, "Hey, you should look up this woman Jen, who was from DC as I was." And so I was new here, and I got to know her, and she had just gotten out of rookie school, and she was a firefighter, and I was like, "Huh, weird." She'd started at Vassar and got transferred to U of M and was like Native American and women's studies major, just a badass intellectual, and a great athlete. And she said, "This was an interesting job. It's a way to help people. It's a good challenge." And that's how I started getting interested in it. And then I just moved back from Boston where I did my grad work. And I slid open my knee, and I went running to the fire station where she worked right by us. And I said, "Hey, look at this. I'm bleeding everywhere." And she was like, "Okay, dude, you should probably go to the hospital." And I didn't have health insurance at the time. I was like, "No, that's why I'm here. You guys can fix me up." And she and the other firefighters who were working looked at me and looked at me bleeding on their floor, which someone was going to have to mop up later. And they're like, "Dude, go to the hospital." And I was like, "But I'm here. You all do this stuff." And they all laughed and they're like, "What? No, we don't do stitches." And I was like, "But why not?" And she's like, "Well, we don't." And she's like, "I can give you a junior firefighter sticker. We might have kind of a musty teddy bear on the rig that we give to little kids when they're scared, but we don't do stitches. You should go to the hospital. You probably need a tetanus shot." And so even though I'd known her and had heard about her work and the challenges, particularly she faced as a woman and as a gay woman, um, I had no clue what firefighters did and did not do. And then, fast forward a handful of years, I get calls from my in-laws asking all sorts of questions, and I'm like, I'm flattered, but call the electric company because I don't know anything about current. I will go in there and get zapped. But it is the generosity and a little bit of the incomprehension that people who don't know better don't know, right? So there's either why are you guys here at all, or oh, I assume you all can do everything, and we're somewhere in between those two.
I found your writing style to be hysterical when you talked about that because it's so well written. And I'm sorry that you were injured, but at the same time, the way that you presented it
Oh,
was hysterical. And I think it just kind of shows how many people, when we look at firefighters and the work that they do, it's just that we really don't have any idea. And that's why when we get injured, we're sometimes showing up at the fire station, right?
sure. No, absolutely. And one of the things I try to push in the middle and then at the end of the book is, a what I try as a captain, but it doesn't really matter my rank, but just as a veteran firefighter to encourage, as I was encouraged by other men and women who really embrace the notion of the public service. Because again, not a nurse, not a doctor. We are barely trained. The paramedics are way more skilled than we are, but we have, especially after this much time, like profound repetition and the ability to read human beings and situations. Like, so our contextual awareness ought to be like diamond tough. And so, what we really do when we're doing our job well, I believe, is we walk in, we kind of cut away all the extraneous information, and we try to figure out what is going on in the moment. And it's much, much more of a holistic approach that, I see that you're down, like you fell, you're hurt, but really you're upset. Right. And right now, my job is to, on some level, provide comfort, calm, and see you as a person. And so, because we're seeing lots of people who are living at, the ever growing margins or the lower margins of our society, meeting people who don't have much and haven't had good options with, both dignity and compassion, and understanding that I have no idea what it's like to be homeless or to struggle with that, some of the profound issues we see, but I can still try to recognize the humanity and be there and be, kind of humble in our shared humanness, right? And that often means absorbing kind of the suffering and the struggle of people. But being able to do that, I think, is one of the rare things, and one of the things I think the majority of my coworkers and I think firefighters across the nation do really well, right? Is we're not super well trained, but we are, because we don't have, either a squad car or an ambulance. We have no way of transporting, so we have to be there with somebody and kind of be present, right? And let somebody know that it's going to be okay. And a lot of the other agencies do a great job with that, but they have higher obligations than we do, right? So I get to walk into a room and just say, well, they called it a heart attack. This person is either really high or really depressed. Let's just be there with them. And I don't care if you're either high or depressed, but I want you to live to see tomorrow. And that's kind of one of the beauties of our job.
Well, and so let's talk about that secondary trauma that our first responders feel, and especially firefighters. So, how do firefighters work through that or with the trauma that they received just by showing up to some of these calls that are very difficult?
That would be well, it's a great question, and it's a very, very actually, it's a good question. It's an obvious question, but it's um, the timing is great because when I even before I started, I asked my friend and mentor Jen the same question when I was hearing her not talking about fires every day, but about all the range of EMS calls, and I said, "Well, that sounds horrible. How do you all handle this?" And back in the mid '90s, culturally, because this is a job that kind of is very very traditional and very kind of, you could say atavistic, you could say reactionary, that it's kind of shaped on the generations that precede it. So people who come on are shaped by the kind of cultural mores that have been inculcated for the generation because most people work this job for 20, 25, 30 years. So we're already being shaped by people whose formative experiences, which is what they're carrying forward, are 30 or 25 years ago. But which meant in the early '90s, this was a kind of post-Vietnam era, predominantly men, predominantly white men, very straight, and it was kind of this rigid, policed machismo. And she said, "Well, you'll get, basically everyone was told to suck it up. There's kind of this very wonderful kind of male camaraderie, but there's also this very problematic kind of fear of feelings, right? And this kind of the enforced stoicism." Eh, But she also added, there's so much in the job that is disturbing. You don't know what's going to bother one person and not another because you don't know what connects on a core level with one person and not the other. And you have to keep working over time. So that was almost 30 years ago. Over time, we have been improving and it's coming, parallel but lagging behind the larger culture. Uh, we've improved the recognition that being kind of hard bitten and stoic isn't productive. Like, you don't need, become a firefighter, you don't need to end up divorced and alcoholic. Like, that's a lot of the cliches, but a lot of it's because of communication skills and self care and learning to kind of turn off the work mind to come home. And we there's been kind of a growing movement to recognize that the what what supposedly worked before didn't actually work that well. Everyone was just kind of white knuckling it or struggling themselves, and so a raft of like this, these suicides and the slow self immolation through drugs or alcohol or despair. And so we are getting better having wellness and health programs put in and then trying to get a culture of largely kind of macho men to admit to feelings has given a really interesting look at a lot of the kind of the perils of compulsory machismo, right? Because a lot of guys, are good at sharing with each other, but only in the way that's kind of cut by jokes, and cut with, it's often like a lot of homoerotic, like locker room banter that is how guys express their feelings. And to say that's bad shuts them down when we haven't necessarily developed a more, what would you say, nakedly emotional, nakedly honest way of expressing. And I had a rookie recently, super sharp young woman, who said, we talk about stoicism, and she's like, and I was off and they had a really really horrible event, and so they were having a post-traumatic or excuse me, a post-incident debriefing. And and several of the guys there were reporting it was the worst thing they'd seen in 20 years. And they were, basically open about, I'm just home, I feel obliterated, I'm drinking more than normal, I'm taking pills to make myself sleep, I'm only coming in because I know my work partner needs help. Like there's the good parts of the bonding, but it's also all the kind of counterproductive coping mechanisms. And this young woman said, what's interesting to me is I'm not sure why we ever thought that Stoicism worked. Like, when has Stoicism ever actually been effective? And I was like, that's a great point, because the people who've been walled off, they may not bother you with their tears, but they're going to bother you with their despair, their depression, their alcoholism, their explosive anger about unrelated things, right? And so even as we're working on better ways to decompress, so now if we have a bad call, our leadership has moved and has progressed and is more willing to say, all right, you guys take an hour or two, if you're okay, like, get your heads right. And if you need more time, you can report off and we'll try to get you formal help. But really, just to give ourselves a break to just clear our heads, and then it keeps going, right? Because one of the bigger issues is that you don't get to say, "Oh, I'd really not want to see," like, my mother is dying. I really don't want to see a sick older woman today, because we don't control what we get, and the world is full of lovely older women who are sick and dying, right? And so you almost are guaranteed to continue to see versions of what upset you before. And so that's kind of that ongoing tension of everybody who starts the emergency response field is guaranteed to be exposed to unbelievably horrific things, sometimes on their first day, sometimes in their first month, sometimes 10 years in. But all of us will have more than our share of really horrible events. And that's the notion of the business. And they don't tell us that when we start.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Jeremy Norton in regards to his new book, Trauma Sponges. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
If you want to stop divorce fast, you do not need to waste years in therapy. You do not need to work on yourself, and you do not even have to have your spouse on board. If your spouse wants out, if they're filing for divorce, separation, or having an affair, what you need is a proven process to turn your marriage around. Book a free breakthrough session with us at highthrivecoaching.com/apply.
Dr. Richard London, who has 25 years of experience being known as the Man of Steel with the Heart of Velvet, presents the Life Wellness System, The Road to Yes, a mentoring system that brings you to becoming a wellness heir. Imagine having wealth, wellness, love, peace, and spirituality in abundance and balance now. Visit doctorateoflife.com or call 720-213-8021 for a free 15-minute wellness evaluation.
Hi, this is Jana Wilson, author of Wise Little One, Learning to Love and Listen to My Inner Child, a best-selling prescriptive memoir in inner child healing. I'm also the founder of the Emotional Healing System. The inner child, simply put, is your feelings, both positive and negative. If you'd like to learn to love and listen to your wise little one, pick up my book at Amazon or visit my website at janawilson.com. It's never too late to have a happy childhood.
The first thing you need to know about me is that I love my kids, but they are not my everything. They used to be, but that's when my entire life fell apart. In order to pick back up the pieces, I had to put the love I have for myself before everything else, including my kids. I'm Jessica Dennehy, and I own multiple businesses. I'm a best-selling author, and I have all the strategies that I've used to make my life what it is today. And I'm going to teach you how to do them in my new book, Selfish is a Superpower. So go get your copy today on Barnes & Noble or jessicadennehy.com.
Announcing a revolutionary tool for wellness. Scalar Light has the ability to enhance and harmonize your own bioenergies. With Scalar Light, you can get started in just minutes and begin feeling better the very next day. Scalar Light is a remote energy that gently and subtly works with your own body's bioenergies, increases pro-cellular wellness, and enhances your body's immunity.
Experience the benefits of Scalar Light. Try a complimentary 15-day experience at scalarlight.com.
In your hands lie ancestral patterns. These patterns shape how you think, what you struggle with, and experiences you love, your life pattern. We're going into the latest neuroscience of biological hand analysis, a realm beyond palmistry where science and the soul entwine. Hand analysis is the latest method to transform lifelong patterns. I am Master Hand Analyst Brent Bruning. Join us and visit thepowerinyourhands.com.
Pandemonium. Fast forward 20 years. A U.S. president seizes control of all U.S. missiles, the power grid, the banking system, and every computer in America as he hides in an underground bunker. Pandemonium, a captivating sci-fi thriller where a hidden war, psychics, aliens, artificial intelligence, and transcendental love collide with the latest media technology. Pandemonium, live to all devices. Get your copy on paperback or digital. Free sample at getpsychic.org.
I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest Jeremy Norton, who's here to share with us his new book, Trauma Sponges. I would like to talk on secondary trauma that first responders experience. It seems that there is so much that we thrust upon our first responders. Is there a need for leadership to change the way they look at mental health? I've often heard in the past that when first responders feel like they need to share about their mental health, they are highly concerned that reporting any secondary trauma they're experiencing will result in them losing their job.
Okay, so I will speak only from a Minneapolis perspective. But I work with, I was not in the military, I work with a lot of military veterans, and a lot of them have reported that there was like that stigma and that kind of booby-trapped reporting process that they experienced in the military, right? So the military was saying genuinely or performatively, and I don't know what, if you're having trouble after combat, if you're, please, let us know. We want to help you because, the military suicides is it's an abomination. Like the men and women serve, volunteer, and then come back traumatized and feel isolated and alone. But a lot of them, report that it felt like a trap, that your career will be over because you will be stigmatized. And I don't know how much that is actually true, how much that remains kind of a cultural thing. Transfer that to the fire service where there are, there are a lot of, I'm not sure what our percentage is right now, but of military veterans that, that comprise the workforce. The received wisdom, which is probably neither received nor wise, has always been they're out to get us, right? So some of it's just that we have a lot of time sitting around between calls, just running our mouths, and we get really, really good at solving all the world's problems badly, but there's always that kind of that paranoia. Well, don't let them know that they'll use it against you. And in 23 years, I have never seen anything used against anyone. And I've seen the fear of that, the threat or specter of that used to impede what could be a better engagement, right? So that people won't report things out of a default or a cultural notion that they're going to use it against us. I would actually say that at least in Minnesota, where in 2019 the legislature kind of passed a presumptive PTSD ruling, that our administration wants people to come to work, wants people to be healthy, and they have been doing well within the system. I think it's not actually a fire department administrative issue as much as it becomes a workers' comp issue, and that gets into finances and that stuff outside of my purview. Though I have opinions about it, but I think we're doing a better job, and a lot of times it's not you have a bad day and you're never able to work again. Like there are people for whom what they've experienced makes coming back to work and worrying about experiencing it again overwhelming. But a lot of people, and that's what is great about kind of a cultural shift outside culture and then within our hermetic profession, is helping people diffuse and disconnect, the associations from the reality from the memories. So there are lots and lots. We had a really really good employee assistant person who had a master's in social work, and she was a wonderful counselor, and was just doing some basic like EMDR things, and a lot of the modal, whatever it is to work through traumas. Like there's so many things that psychology and resilience training has been doing in the larger society. And so offering that to us, a lot of my coworkers have taken her up on that. But I think the stigma is removed and there are more options to take care of it, take care of those issues. And one of the things I write about, and it really kind of came to me as I was editing the book, that and I'm a peer counselor, and so in some of the trainings we've done and speaking with firefighters who've had kind of traumatic issues, I think the a lot of what people run into trouble through is kind of the cognitive dissonance of this idea that because you see the iconic fire truck, you see the cool turnout gear, that there's this expectation that we carry from when we start that you're going to have to pass muster. You're going to have to live in these monster fire boots of these legends that everyone talks about. And so there's a degree of imposter syndrome. There's the anxiety of influence. There's the worry about fitting in, and so many people worry about the peer culture aspect of it, not being seen as a failure or a flop or a fraud. That there's so much posturing, and then the best of us are might be funny and kind of laceratingly cutting, but we mock ourselves first and foremost. And for me, I'd say that if I mess up on a call, I'm hard on myself. Like I don't want to mess up, and I will be down on myself so that I don't repeat the error. And but I'm pretty clear about everything else, that I didn't start the fire, I didn't cause the car wreck, I didn't make the person smoke for 50 years. And so when we show up to something that's already happened or is in progress still, the best we can do is stop the harm, right? And so for me, I am very, very clear at the kind of objective fact of gravity, of biology, of physics, and human behavior. So I take almost no calls personally. And I think for me at least that, and then I take care of, like, I don't drink, I exercise, I sleep, like I am already doing all those other things that are helpful for resilience and health, right? But I think there's that fundamental difference, and I notice that talking to people who struggle, where they're kind of caught up in this notion where several of the people I've kind of counseled have said, we came to this car crash, the car's upside down, this poor woman, she was dead, and the eyes were fixed on me, and I just felt bad. I should have done something. And so that becomes the narrative that the person has internalized. And then that becomes what haunts him or her, like this failure. And I said, but you didn't hit her. Like you arrived and this person was already dead. Like don't don't insert yourself as a hero nor as a failure into something that has nothing to do with you. Like and I think that's a cultural thing. It's not just me being, superior at processing or being cold-blooded, but I think because we will see nothing but other people's suffering. And so I think being clear and then finding a way to, like, I'm leaving space to absorb hard things, process them, and come back to work. And I see a lot of people get hung up, and I think they really do get stuck in this idea that we're supposed to solve or fix everything, and that is just a setup. Does that answer or help on that question?
It does. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. I think there's no one right answer for anybody, but the fact that we're addressing it and looking at
Right.
mental health and how people can help heal those wounds that no one sees is such an important thing.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
What is a one of the calls that you've been on that really impacted you?
That's a well-crafted question. Generally, I get the kind of macho dudes at although I don't go out to bars much, but it's at picnics or stuff who kind of do the "What's the worst call you've ever seen?" And which is not what you're asking. I'm clear about that. But the versions of that, and and there are a lot of people who don't want to open up their memory banks. And I think I've say in the book, but I've said elsewhere that with people who are dismissive or skeptical, there's a certain tone that provokes me, which then I have, uh, endless endless brutal things that are in me that I've seen, witnessed, remember, and it's kind of like that movie, The Bird Box, where people are like the people who are crazed are forcing other people to look up at the sun to see the monsters. And then it's like there's times when I want to hold open people's eyes to see that it's not just, some stereotypical, that person made bad choices and that's what happened, but to understand all the cultural aspects that shape lives, generations of lives, to lead people to where they are. And the same way that, like, I didn't wake up and choose to be white and male and privileged. That's a whole constellation of cultural, very real cultural aspects or attributes. And then from there, how I live my life. But I live it with education and comfort, and I have a place to live and all that. And so for me to look at somebody who's living on the street or has drug addiction or drug abuse issues or is making bad choices in terms of how they eat or how they feed their kids, it is I think a moral failure to take as a reductive, well, if they'd only done this or that, they wouldn't be living like that. It's like it's like boomers saying if you didn't order that avocado toast, 20-year-old, you'd be able to buy a house for $40,000. And it's like you're missing several steps along the way. I've seen so many different calls that, like, humble me and awe me. I will say one thing that I hold on to is in actually, I don't even remember how many years ago. Well, the I-35 bridge collapsed over the Mississippi River 13 years ago, I believe. And we all responded, and a lot of cars fell into the river. There were 13 lives lost, and a lot of kind of in the moment, like, citizens jumped in to help each other. But there was a man who was driving kind of an adaptive vehicle. He had his legs didn't work, and his van stopped probably 20 feet from where the break was, where where the bridge collapsed and fell. And so he, just that's just the luck of the draw. Like, people just ahead of him fell, he didn't. People just behind him stopped before the bridge. Like, so he was on the broken part of the bridge. And this guy got out of his van and he crawled probably 100 feet back up towards safety. And I'm, and that's what we see so many versions of people who have overcome things and people who understand like the need for self-sufficiency and the need for that sort of human resilience. And that has always struck me and stuck with me in terms of, if I'm feeling bad because my ankle hurts, there's somebody out there whose legs don't work, who's willing to drag himself up a collapsed bridge, having witnessed the people ahead of him collapsing into death because kind of survival is the imperative. And that is something that I kind of carry with me. And a second one was, in the aftermath of 9/11, we did more kind of large scale public safety events. And we at one point helped like a practice evacuation of our government center building. And people who self-identified as needing help were able to take the elevators down, and everyone else took the stairs. And a lot of the people who self-identified as, needing help were generally people who were just not very active. And and then coming out the stairwell were several people who had physical limitations, physical disabilities, legs that didn't work well. And again, it's that humbling sense of we see people who make do, who are struggling with real challenges, and do so with a profound resilience and a profound grace. And then we see people for who, because of the comfort and privilege of this nation, who can choose to self-select. And in our heads, the people who took the elevator, if there had been an actual issue, would be the ones who died because the jet fuel went down the elevator shaft. Which it was just a telling analogy. So I mean, those are examples. I mean, I just so many opportunities to watch humans making really horrible decisions and the consequences, but also so many wonderful, like the grace we see of people who don't have much, who are still so generous, who are still caring, who are trying to make do. And that's the thing, that if we become jaded by the squalor and the suffering and the hardships, that's where we lose, I think, our human connection. And that's what I think so many of my coworkers do a great job of, being there and present with people.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you sharing that with us. I would think also that you've probably had some babies along the way that have come back to visit you.
Dude, it is the funniest luck of the draw. There are no kids named Jeremy running around out here. However, one of my coworkers, a co-captain on the other shift, delivered 2 babies in a day. I mean, I think she has probably 6 kids named Tracy running around the city. What, but but that's what I'm saying, that we don't control it. Just so happened that on Monday and Wednesday, in the part of the city we were in at that time, Engine 5 rolled up and found like a woman giving birth, a teenage girl giving birth in a park. And Tracy's crew handled that. Then they went, and a woman was trying to get to the car to get to the hospital, and she gave birth on the porch. They were there for that. All we really do is catch the baby. I mean, I'm very clear that the mother does all the work and gravity. But I've actually, this many years, this past spring, I had 2 very close to catching babies, but they were still had already been delivered before we arrived. So I am, in 23 years, have yet to be there for the actual entrance. And I've got coworkers who have 5, 6, 7, 8, or 10. It's just the luck of the draw.
I had to ask. Yeah.
Oh no, I know, and it's one of those things. And I was teaching a writing class early 2000s at the Loft Literary Center, this wonderful place in Minneapolis, and one of the women in the class was telling me, I hadn't seen her in a couple years. She took a class and she came back a couple years later. She's like, "Yeah, I saw a couple of your buddies." I'm like, "Oh, where?" She's like, "When I gave birth in the back of an ambulance." And she's like, "And that was not in my birth plan." I was like, "Oh, buddy." She's like, "They were sweet and I was mortified. And it's very crowded in an ambulance. And it's not like I didn't have Enya playing. I didn't have my handkerchiefs draped over the lighting. It was it was brutal, but that's life. And they were there and they were great. And half those dudes were more embarrassed than I was, and I was really embarrassed, and they were all treated me great, and it was healthy, and that's what happened, right? And there is those moments where we just, there are truly so few happy moments in emergency response, right? So babies, a living wanted baby is both a rarity and a cause for just inordinate celebration, right? And so it is great, even if we're just catching it and wrapping it and making sure it's doing okay and calming help reassuring the mother that all is well, or if there's a father present telling him to slow down and take a breath.
Well, I think that's all very important and what a impact that makes. Jeremy, what do you want listeners and our readers to take away from your book?
I, I, I've been trying to think, kind of my understanding of the material, has kind of become clearer as it's been out of my hands. And I really think that I would really love people to understand more about the not just like I don't need them to know that much about the 911 emergency system, but I want people to kind of think before they call, not to give up their agency, their autonomy, not to like basically don't go to WebMD because it always ends up saying you're probably dying and you should call 911, right? And eh, but to appreciate that there's a whole machinery behind an innocent call and that can lead to complications. That's one point. Two, that there's a lot of real struggle and hardship and suffering everywhere in our society. And, being appreciative and kind of cognizant of that and and kind of the struggles that other people have. Uh, and the fact that somebody has to show up and deal with it, and that's not a fixable or life hackable solution. But the last thing, and I think the most important, is man, I really want to encourage people to start having end of life discussions. I had an op-ed piece in the Minneapolis Star Tribune a couple weeks ago about that, and I I I'm old enough now, and my parents are older that like we go to nursing homes, we go to convalescent homes, we go to transitional care facilities, we go to private homes, and seeing the way that our disconnect from the human process, from biology, from the fact that every birth is going to end in death, it leads to so much avoidable suffering, so much pain, so much guilt. And Dr. Sunita Puri wrote that Good Night memoir about her work as a palliative care doctor. And I think it's Atul Gawande wrote Being Mortal several years ago, also about that disconnect. And they're both ER doctors or hospitalists, and I see it or we see it in the homes. So I that doctors aren't asked the right questions. They're still not taught and encouraged to have conversations where they say there is no hope, like this is a fatal issue, because they don't want to incur a family's denial or hope or guilt or anger, like all five of the stages until acceptance. And so they avoid it, and so they euphemize it, and we see people who've been told, but not in ways they understand, that their loved one is dying, and they call 911 because they want us to bring the person back to the hospital so they can be fixed. And there isn't fixing terminal cancer. There isn't fixing any range, there isn't fixing age, right? Like we all will run out of time. And we see that what that disconnect leads to in terms of people send their loved ones or back to the hospital hoping they improve, and all that happens is it becomes a cycle where their final weeks, months, or even years spent in and out of places. And really the problem isn't that the hospitals aren't doing a good job, is that we can't fix mortality. Like there isn't a life hack for mortality either. And so yeah, we can do meds and they can put somebody on a ventilator, but that's not a quality of life. And so I really wish hospitals or medical places would, after age 60, basically have a compulsory discussion. Right now they're asking, right now some of the forms say, do you have any questions about end of life care? And most people say no, because they have no idea what that entails or what that means or what it implies. And so the checklist has been done on the hospital or the doctor side, but you're having patients who are leaving still not understanding what's coming or what their options are. And that means that people like me and my coworkers and the paramedics will come into houses seeing people who should just be made comfortable, propped up in a bed to look at their family or look at the sunrise and the sunset and be allowed to expire peacefully. Because this idea of like, and Dr. Puri talks about it wonderfully, like, they're a fighter. It's like, right, but what does that mean? Because this notion that fighting, you're not going to defeat terminal cancer. You're not going to defeat this, kind of a fatal respiratory issue or cardiac issue, but you can have your body plugged full of tubes and wires and medications, and you're an unresponsive, pre-corpse. And it's like, I don't want to be graphic or coarse about it, but having to do CPR on someone who should have been allowed to just expire with the family, sending them off with love and grace and tears and beauty that's kind of the harder stuff for us often, is seeing the collateral damage and being collateral bystanders to the breakdown of communication and understanding, and that's just the horrific effects of denial. Like, that's really, I want people to start rupturing that smothering denial, right? Like, we're all going to die, and I don't want us to die quickly, and I don't want, I hate despair. I want people to live as best they can, as well as they can. But I also want to understand that when somebody's going downhill, we shouldn't be surprised. We should understand that what we can do is help them get ready for their final transition, so that we don't carry guilt after the fact that we did something wrong or that they suffered, all that. And we want them not to suffer as they're going out. That would be my takeaway.
I think that's such a great takeaway that a lot of people need to consider. Well, Jeremy, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work and your book, Trauma Sponges?
Well, I do have a website, jeremynorton.info, which, is kind of rudimentary, but it has links to the book and to, the very wonderful, overworked, undersupported, and understaffed University of Minnesota Press. They've just been excellent, and they took a chance on this random firefighter telling weird stories. And with their help, we've really shaped it into something I feel that's much more than just a bunch of scary fire stories. As I say, I think I'm trying to write to the kind of the heart of the human experience. But that my website, the University of Minnesota Press website.
Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, I appreciate it. I just got back from a couple months off with a knee injury, and it is always nice to get back into the work and the mayhem, and then it's also an adjustment to kind of being on the beck and call of the emergency system and wandering out and seeing the world. And I'll tell you what, I have a huge grin, even though we're seeing hard stuff. I just feel like the privilege of engaging with people and trying to make people's days better is what most firefighters, I think most EMTs, and I think most of us in emergency response, but I think we, more so than the paramedics or the police officers, we get to try to make people's days better. And I walk home, and even though I'm tired from lack of sleep and all the rest, my heart and my soul just feel enriched. And if I can, help make other people's days better, that is just a wonderful way. So it was nice to come be thinking about it, speaking with you all during a 48-hour shift where I was, kind of reflecting on everything we saw.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Trauma Sponges: Dispatches from the Scarred Heart of Emergency Response. Trauma Sponges is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and everywhere books are sold. And remember, support our indie bookstores. If you don't see it on the shelf, just ask for them to order it. I'd like to thank University of Minnesota Press for setting up this interview with Jeremy Norton. We are so grateful that we've had this time together. Make sure to visit Jeremy's website at jeremynorton.info for more information on his work and to be part of his community. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.